My name is Richard, and I need to tell you something that's haunted me every single day for the past 3 years. I worked 80-hour weeks for 28 years straight. I built a career in corporate law that made me a partner by 40. I had the corner office on the 47th floor. I had the Mercedes in the driveway. I had the house in the suburbs with the perfectly manicured lawn. People called me successful. My firm used me as an example in recruitment materials. Other lawyers asked me how I managed such a demanding caseload. But here's what nobody knew. While I was building that career, case by case, billable hour by billable hour, I was losing my son. Not slowly, not gradually, completely. And 3 years ago, when he was dying in a hospital bed at 31 years old, his last words to me were, "You were never there." Not, "I love you," not "thank you," just a statement of fact. You were never there. And then he was gone. I'm 72 years old now. I've been retired for 7 years. I have more money than I need and more time than I know what to do with. But my son is dead, and his last memory of me, his final thought about his father, was that I was absent, that I didn't show up, that I chose work over him for his entire life. And I can never change that. I can never take it back. I can never get one more conversation, one more chance to say I'm sorry. And if you're out there right now, working late again, missing another dinner, telling yourself your kids understand, telling yourself you're providing for them, telling yourself you'll have time later, I need you to stop and hear this. Because there might not be a later, there might not be time. And the last thing you want is to be standing at your child's funeral, knowing that they died, believing you didn't care. Let me take you back to 1988. I was 36 years old, newly married to Patricia, and I'd just made junior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. Everyone told me this was it. This was the dream. If I could just push through the next few years, if I could just prove myself, I'd make senior partner, financial security, prestige, everything I'd worked for since law school. The hours were insane from day one. 80, 90, sometimes 100-hour weeks during major cases. I'd leave the house at 6 a.m. I'd come home at midnight. Patricia would be asleep. I'd shower, sleep 4 hours, and do it again. Weekends didn't exist. Holidays were just days I worked from home instead of the office. But I told myself it was temporary. Just a few more years. Just until I make senior partner. Then I'll have more control. Then I'll have time. That's the lie I told myself for nearly 3 decades. In 1991, our son Daniel was born. I was in the middle of depositions for a multi-million-dollar corporate merger when Patricia called from the hospital. I remember looking at my watch, calculating how much longer the deposition would take, wondering if I could finish before heading to the hospital. My colleague saw my face and said, "Go, I'll handle this." I resented him for it. I actually resented being pulled away from work for my son's birth. I made it to the hospital 2 hours after Daniel was born. Patricia was crying, holding our son, and I walked in with my tie loosened, my briefcase still in my hand, my mind still on the deposition. I held Daniel for maybe 15 minutes before I started checking my pager, before I started thinking about all the work piling up, before I started calculating when I could get back to the office. I told myself I was doing this for him, building his future, securing his education, making sure he'd never struggle the way I did growing up. All the justifications every absent father makes. The pattern started immediately. I missed his first words because I was in trial. I missed his first steps because I was at a client dinner. I missed his first day of kindergarten because I had an emergency hearing. There was always something, always a case, always a client, always a deadline that felt more important than being present. I have this memory that absolutely destroys me. Daniel was maybe 6 years old. He'd built something with his Legos, spent hours on it, some kind of spaceship. He was so proud. He brought it to my home office on a Sunday afternoon, where I was reviewing case files. He stood in the doorway, holding this spaceship, his face lit up with excitement, waiting for me to notice. I didn't even look up. I just said, "Not now, buddy. Daddy's working." He stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then he said so quietly, You're always working. And he walked away. I heard something shatter in the hallway. He'd dropped the spaceship. I heard him crying. And I still didn't get up. I still didn't go to him. I finished reviewing my files first. By the time I went to check on him 20 minutes later, he'd cleaned up the broken pieces and gone to his room. The door was closed. I knocked, asked if he was okay. He said yes. I went back to work. I told myself we'd have time to build something together later. There was always going to be later. By 1998, I'd made senior partner. Everything I'd worked for. Big salary bump. More prestige. And somehow even more hours. Because now I was responsible for bringing in clients, managing junior partners, growing the firm. The work never decreased, it only increased. And I kept telling myself just a few more years, just until the kids are older, just until I've built enough financial security. Daniel was 7 years old, and I barely knew him. He had hobbies I couldn't name. He had friends I'd never met. He had a whole life that existed completely separate from me. And I told myself that was normal. That was just how it worked when you had a demanding career. Other successful men didn't have perfect family lives. You had to make sacrifices. Patricia tried to warn me, over and over. I remember one night she said, "He asks about you constantly. He wants to know why you're never home. He wants to know if you love him." I got defensive immediately. Of course I loved him. I was working for him. Everything I did was for this family. And Patricia just looked at me with this exhaustion and said, "He doesn't need your money, Michael. He needs his father." But I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. Because if I listened, I'd have to admit I was making the wrong choice. I'd have to admit I was choosing my career over my son. And I wasn't ready to admit that. The teenage years were a disaster. Daniel stopped trying to connect with me entirely. He stopped asking me to come to his basketball games. He stopped showing me his report cards. He stopped telling me about his life. When I'd ask questions at dinner, he'd give one-word answers. When I'd try to plan something together, he'd say he had other plans. He'd learned what I'd taught him, that I wasn't available, that he couldn't depend on me, that other things were more important. By the time he was 16, we were essentially strangers living in the same house. I'd see him at breakfast sometimes. If my schedule allowed, we'd exchange maybe 20 words. He'd leave for school. I'd leave for work. Patricia was the bridge between us, constantly telling me what was happening in his life, because he didn't tell me himself. In 2007, Daniel went to college, Northwestern. Not far, but far enough. When we dropped him off, he hugged his mother for 5 minutes. He shook my hand, a handshake, like I was a business associate, not his father. I told myself it was just typical teenage awkwardness. We'd connect later, when he was older, when he'd matured and understood what I'd been doing for him. That's the lie I kept telling myself. Later, always later. In 2010, Patricia asked for a divorce. 22 years of marriage. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was just done. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I can't be married to someone who's never here. I can't keep explaining to our son why his father doesn't show up. I'm tired, Michael. I'm tired of being alone." I couldn't argue with her. She was right. I'd been physically present maybe 20% of our marriage. The rest of the time I was at the office or thinking about the office. Even when I was home, I was checking emails, taking calls, reviewing files. I'd never really been there, not in any way that mattered. After the divorce, I told myself I'd fix things with Daniel. I'd have more time now, more freedom. We'd rebuild our relationship. I called him, suggested we have dinner. He was polite but non-committal. "Maybe, Dad, I'll check my schedule." The same thing I'd said to him 1,000 times when he'd asked for my time. Over the next few years, I saw him maybe 3 times a year. Brief lunches, awkward conversations where we talked about surface things. His job, the weather, sports. Never anything real. Never anything that mattered. There was this wall between us that I didn't know how to break through. And honestly, I didn't try that hard. I was still working 60-hour weeks, still telling myself work came first. In 2019, I finally retired. I was 67 years old. I'd worked for 42 years, and suddenly I had nothing but time. I thought this was it. This was my chance. Now I could reconnect with Daniel. Now I could be the father I'd always meant to be. I called him, left messages, sent texts. He'd respond days later with brief replies. Busy with work, Dad. We'll catch up soon. The same excuses I'd given him for 30 years. I'd taught him well. Then in March 2022, Daniel called me. Actually called. I was shocked. We hadn't spoken in months. He asked if he could come over, said he needed to talk. I said yes immediately, excited that maybe this was our chance to finally connect. He came over the next day. He looked thin, tired. He sat down and said, "I need to tell you something." And then he told me, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 2 months earlier. The doctors said maybe 6 months, maybe less. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I asked why he hadn't told me sooner. He just looked at me with this expression I'll never forget and said, "Would you have been there?" That question destroyed me, because the answer was yes. Of course I would have been there. But he didn't know that. He genuinely didn't know if I'd show up for him, even when he was dying, because I'd never shown up for anything else. The next 6 months were the worst of my life. I tried to be there for everything, every doctor's appointment, every treatment. I rearranged my entire retired life around his schedule. I called constantly. I visited his apartment. I tried to take care of him, and he let me, but there was this distance, this coldness, like he was allowing a stranger to help him, not welcoming his father. Patricia was there constantly. She'd been there his whole life. She knew his doctors, his medications, his fears. She held his hand through the pain. She was everything I should have been, and I was the outsider, trying to make up for 30 years of absence in 6 months. One afternoon, I was sitting next to his bed while he slept. There was a box on his nightstand. I opened it, not thinking. Inside were things from his childhood. A birthday card I'd sent when I missed his 10th birthday, for a case. A program from his high school graduation, where he'd been valedictorian. I'd been there but left early for a conference call. A photo of his college graduation, where I'd shown up 30 minutes late and missed him walking across the stage. He'd kept all of it, all the evidence of my absence, all the proof that I'd chosen work over him, again and again. And looking at those items, I finally understood the magnitude of what I'd done. I hadn't just missed moments, I'd missed his entire life. In September 2022, Daniel's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospice nurse said it would be soon. Patricia and I sat on either side of his bed. He was barely conscious, in pain, fading. I held his hand. I said, "Daniel, I'm here. I'm right here. I love you so much." His eyes opened slightly. He looked at me, and with the last strength he had, he said, "You were never there." 4 words, his final words to me. Not "I love you too," not "I forgive you," just a statement of fact. You were never there. And then he closed his eyes, and an hour later, he was gone. I sat there holding his hand, Patricia crying on the other side, and I understood with absolute clarity that my son died believing I didn't care about him, that I'd loved my career more than I loved him, and there was nothing I could do to change it, no conversation I could have, no apology I could make. It was over. I'm 72 years old now, 3 years later, and I still hear those words every single day. You were never there. I wake up hearing them. I go to sleep hearing them. They're the truth I can never escape. I have money. I have financial security. I have a retirement fund that could last me another 30 years. And none of it matters, because my son is gone, and his last thought about me was that I was absent, that I failed him, that I chose work over him for his entire life. Here's what took me 7 decades to learn. Your career will not remember you. Your company will replace you. Your cases will be handled by someone else. But your children will remember. They'll remember every missed game, every broken promise, every time you chose work over them. And they'll carry that forever. I see men today making the same mistakes I made, working endless hours, missing their kids' childhoods, telling themselves they're providing, telling themselves there will be time later. And I want to grab them and shake them and scream, there might not be time later. Your son might not live to see you retire. Your daughter might not wait for you to finally be ready to be present. If I could go back, I'd quit that firm. I'd take a less demanding job. I'd make less money. I'd have a smaller house, a cheaper car, no prestige. And I'd be at every single one of Daniel's basketball games. I'd help him with his homework. I'd build Legos with him. I'd be there, actually there. But I can't go back. All I can do is live with the knowledge that my son died believing I didn't love him, that he died alone in the ways that mattered, even though I was sitting right next to him, because the relationship was already dead. I'd killed it years ago through thousands of small choices to prioritize work over presence. So if you're reading this and you're working late again, I'm begging you, close your laptop, leave the office, go home, be with your kids, not physically present while mentally absent, actually there, because I promise you, 20 years from now you won't remember what that project was, but your kids will remember whether you were there. And if something happens, if your child gets sick, if time runs out, you want their last words to you to be, I love you, not you were never there. Learn from me. Choose differently. Because I built a successful career and lost everything that mattered. And now I have to live with that for whatever time I have left. Don't be me. Don't wait until it's too late. Go be with your kids. Right now. Because time doesn't care about your career plans. And once it's gone forever.